and welcome to In Session Film. I'm Shadan Larkey. Mr. Wagner, I'm so excited to have you here to talk about your production design on September 5. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
Um, okay, so I have to start with being a nerd for a second. Journalism films are my favorite kinds of films. They're the reason that I went to journalism school. I was wondering if, what is your relationship to that genre? Do you have any favorites? Do you have any that you studied to kind of prepare for this?
Well, I mean, I've always loved, the intensity of journalistic dramas,
Mm.
and I don't know. There's something about the stakes, about the truth, and the ethical questions, and about the speed of these dramas. The speed about the um, solutions and answers that they need to find. And that's very cinematic, and I always love that. I think films like All the President's Men
Mm. Yeah.
are really a great source, something that we all liked, and me in particular, or Spotlight. This have been, touch points for the research and for the understanding of how such a drama could work and how the journalistic work is about. They showed me how the setting can feel like, like a character itself, these kind of movies, because very often, or this is my experience, these journalistic dramas evolve in only one room, or a newsroom, or one set, and by making the decision to entirely focus on the media and the media's perspective, the script changed very much, and the genre of the movie changed, and it became a one-room thriller, a chamber play, and this changed a lot in my perspective of the movie, because I have always been intrigued by these one-room thrillers. And even though I have worked a lot with contained spaces, like spaceship, or submarine, or these kind of movies, I never worked in such a contained small space. And designing the space and make it work for a story that that unfolds within this room and carries a plot over more than 90 minutes. This was very exciting and challenging at the same time.
Yeah, that was one of my big questions for you is how do you design a space knowing that most of your film is going to take place there? Is that exciting, daunting, and then where do you even begin? And then how does that space, or did that space evolve sort of as you were designing, as the plot continues? Tell me about that. I'm so curious about what that was like.
Well, first of all, it was both. It was a blessing and a challenge. And working with a single and confined space, allows you to focus all your energy on making it as perfect and immersive as possible. And at the same time, it needs to remain visually dynamic, and engaging for the audience throughout the film, which means you it it is a process through the film, and I think the set needs to have a process as well. It needs to transform and to change in a way, and there are not so many options to do that unless you do a fantasy movie. So you have to work, with light, and maybe with a false perspective and these things. And knowing that the design had to carry, such a huge plot, brought a lot of pressure in the designing process. I felt there was no room for mistakes, and for sure, this was the most detailed set I've ever designed in my life. Um, and we also wanted to support the way Tim Fehlbaum and Markus Förderer, the DP, wanted to shoot this movie because they had a very unique and special approach. They wanted to follow the actors in the story as the journalists did it back in 1972. They were following all the events from moment to moment while the story unfolds. And Tim and Marcus wanted to do the same thing. So we had to design and create a 360-degree set, a continuous set, where you could step from one room into another. And these kind of challenges were, were great and very exciting. And I think this
Um,
changed a lot.
as you mentioned, the film takes place in the 70s and based on real life events. Tell me about sort of going through the archival footage and then finding, the computers, the screens, sort of all these old tech that play such an integral role in creating this space.
I mean, we started with the archival footage. This was our first source, and it was a great source. It provided an essential foundation for the design process. But at the same time, we always saw what the cameras have seen throughout this archival footage. We never saw behind the camera. And we had, a great partner in Jeffrey Mason, the producer from the ABC Sports team back in the days. And he provided us with a lot of intel and knowledge about the process of the journalistic work and the workflow itself. And he also gave us quite a few images, photographs from the time, and they were a great inspiration, but only fragments. Because it was always about the crew. So we had, like a piece of a puzzle here, another there, and everything became a big puzzle. And we had to fill in the gaps with creativity or throughout a lot of conversations with technical experts and people from the time. And then we, at some point, we had quite a good, a clear image about how the newsroom looked like. And then we started, especially with the help of our production buyer, Johannes Faller, we started to do an immense research about where to find these pieces. And, it led us from Germany to the Netherlands and to Italy and Czech Republic. We even checked the States for several machines, and then luckily decided that we stick to what we can find in Europe. And then we at some point we had it all together, and then we collected it and brought it to Munich into a studio and started to refurbish, anything. And once the equipment arrived, it was a collaboration between the technical experts and the dressing team, the prop department, and many of these machines were incredibly loud. So we had to find a way to make them work and to rewire everything, but to make sure it looks right and everything functions in the way we need it. But the inner device, the loud machine, shouldn't be running all the time. So we had to work a bit around it and to customize a lot.
You mentioned that this is the most detailed project that you have ever worked on. What were some of those details? What were some of the sort of minute things that you really had to make sure were correct in order for the whole thing to work?
You mean like in the machinery and the devices, or?
Yes, but also other aspects that come to mind.
Well, when I say it was all about the details, is that we wanted the set to feel like a real TV studio set from 72. We wanted it to be like a time machine for the actors and the crew. And so the layers of details became incredibly high. It was, layer by layer by layer, and we added, another note, and there were so many details that you maybe don't see in the movie, but I think they help a lot to make it feel tangible. Like for example, we had in the corridor, we had a memo board, which they used back in the days to, it was like a big schedule where you could just, put handmade notes in it, saying where is what is happening where and what kind of crew is going there. And um, I knew we will never see it in detail, but still every little note was correct and researched, and you could have done detailed shots of it. Same for all these glued on memos, because they had a lot of memos, because they had to work very fast, and there was no digital equipment, so they made notes all the time, where to cut from one to A, and what happens in second three. And so we did the same. We added a lot of these memos, and then in also in the patina process, every scrub board and whatever you can imagine in such a set was made to be ready for a close up. And I think you can feel it. You can feel that this set is real and not fake.
You mentioned a time machine. I mean, it really did feel like that to me. It felt like I was in a newsroom from the 1970s. Can you talk a little bit about the time restraints or perhaps the budgetary constraints? Because September 5 is not a big movie, it's not an action blockbuster. I mean, that has to play into how the work that you do. And as you mentioned, you're trying to source materials from all over Europe. I mean, how did you manage to do all of that?
Um, yeah, I think time was one of our biggest challenges. I mean, the team had, only 4 to 6 weeks to refurbish uh, all the machines, and to assemble it and integrate it, all the equipment in the sets. Even the building process was a very fast one. We didn't have the studio for such a long time. We only had like 2 months in total. So we had to prepare a lot of set pieces and then bring it all in, and everyone had to work simultaneously. And if you build a set that is a continuous set with a lot of rooms that are attached to another, the design process carries on while you are building, because you always have to see how one room works with another, because you can see from one room to another, or from the control room you could see into the corridor and further on into the VTR room, and it all needed to have the right depth. And we were mainly working with shades of gray, so it's really hard to even so we do a lot of concept work in before, and I'm very precise about concept drawings, but it's still a little bit different. If you are changing a tone in one room, then you have to adapt it to another one. So it was a process, and sometimes it felt like we have the same time pressure like the journalistic team in the movie, because we were just
Mm.
following the building process, and then deciding on the day what we could change. I wasn't always in constant conversation with my head scenic painter and with the construction manager and set decorator, of course, and prop master. And we were all standing there most of the time. This was really not a project where you can sit in your office and just take the phone and call your art director what to do and what to change. You have to
Yeah.
be on the ground to do that.
One of the reasons why I really love interviewing craftspeople is because I'm just so curious about the passion for these details and things. I mean, for you and I mentioned, journalism dramas being such a big part of my passion for journalism. Were there films early on where you sort of started to notice the production design and go, "Oh, what is that?" Or I mean, how did you sort of find your passion for this craft that you do?
Mm, I always had a passion for art and architecture. My father was an architect, so I grew up with all these, pictures and with a drawing process and the creative process about designing spaces and buildings. But as for falling in love with production design, I fell in love with movies that made me dream, um, and films that completely transported me to another world. So especially films like Star Wars or Indiana Jones, these kind of movies were huge influences growing up. And of course, Blade Runner really marked a turning point for me. I think this was the first movie I saw where I thought, okay, this is a different world, a parallel universe, and it feels real. And I I was totally transported into that world. And from that moment on, I knew um, I need to design spaces and worlds. And I just didn't know how to do that. I never thought about becoming a production designer at this age. I didn't really understood that there is someone doing this. I just knew
Yeah.
this is the world, I want to work in. This is where I want to go. I needed a bit of time to figure out what job
Well,
I
I
want to do.
that's so fascinating. I'd love to know how your background in architecture has sort of led you to this.
Mm. In this decision or specifically
Well,
for
in
September?
in your led you to this career and has
Mm.
aided you in this career to get to where you are.
I think I really get a great foundation regarding aesthetics
Mm.
and you know balancing shapes and also I guess I grew up with the understanding of what architecture can uh, can tell you in terms of what emotions can it make tangible.
Yeah.
But it always felt a bit, I guess I missed the narrative there. It was too static, and it only worked for me when I was standing somewhere looking at a building or something. This is, how I learned. My father, went with me outside, and then he showed me a building. We're discussing it, and um, of course, this was a great influence. But at some point, I wanted to have more. I wanted to tell a story,
Mm.
and yeah, so I went into a different direction. But I got all the visual tools, so to say, from that background.
And where does September 5 fit in your arc as a production designer? What pieces of this film are you going to take with you to your next project?
Um, well, September 5 taught me the incredible value of authenticity
Mm.
as a foundation for creativity. Before, because I was creating a lot of fantasy and sci-fi-ish movies on Spices, I always thought that reality is a limitation. And here I was pushed and forced to really work with reality and authenticity. And I realized that this is very liberating because with such a solid base, it allows you to take creative risks because you know what you're doing. You have researched it all, and then you can decide, okay, what the right balance here to take a bit more creative license. And I also learned a lot about the difference between reality and authenticity because reality for me is something very subjective and inconsistent. But but authenticity is about creating a feeling of truth, and this this has to resonate with the audience. And mm, authenticity is not about replicating reality. It's about it's about, to say, distilling the most important elements to support the narrative and the story. And this is something I learned in this design process. And I think this is, something that I would take from here and, take it with me to other projects. And another key lesson was the power of collaboration. This is something that was so unique in this movie, beginning with the producers, that were so hands-on and always on set, and we were always on eye level, and every problem, every question was answered, in a team process. And the director, he's so focused and passionate and always there. And this goes, throughout all the departments. We were working as a really good team. It was very inspiring. And it reminded me that the production design isn't something that exists in isolation. It's part of a larger puzzle. And the better the collaboration, the better the final result. So I think that's something that I want to take with me.
Yeah, this is why I love conversations like this, because now I've gotten such a greater appreciation for your craft just based on your perspective. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to mention before I let you go? I want to make sure you have this space.
Mm, no, not really. I think we touched, the basic, the core ideas and thought of this. I mean, of course, there is so many details and things that,
Yeah.
I could talk about for hours, about the construction of the control room, and how we supported, the drama and the emotional world with little tricks. But it's yeah, it's something that we can discuss another time, I'd say.
Is there anything that you're currently working on that you'd be able to mention, or would like to mention, or what's next for you?
Um, hmm, I think I can't really tell you, precisely what I'm working on, but let me add this thought. I'm I'm working again on something that is different from September 5, but there are a few thoughts and ideas that they have both in common. Because it's again about the balance between, let's say, reality, tradition, and about authenticity, and heightened reality, about a world that is a parallel world to what we know. And both has to be combined and integrated. And I think in this regard, it's somehow something that follows September 5, very organic.
And it seems like it's a combination of all the things that you enjoy about your work. So I hope whatever it is, I get to talk to you about it. Thank you so much, and I wish you the best of luck on September 5 and everything else. And I hope I get to talk to you again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It was my pleasure.